The old woman was still alive when they rode away. That was the mistake they would regret for the rest of their lives. At 68 years old, Martha Bell could barely stand without her walking stick. Her silver hair was covered in desert dust, her dress was torn at the shoulder, and one side of her face was swollen from the beating she had taken that morning. Yet as 6 riders disappeared beyond the red cliffs, Martha did not cry. She simply watched them go. The man who had ordered her death was Caleb Voss, the richest rancher in Red Hollow County. For 20 years, Martha had lived quietly on a small piece of land beside Blackstone Canyon. She raised horses, grew vegetables, and kept to herself. But 6 months earlier, Caleb discovered something he wanted. Oil. A surveyor had found signs of oil beneath Martha's property. Caleb offered her money. Martha refused. He offered more. She still refused. Finally, he stopped asking. That morning, Caleb's men arrived before sunrise. They dragged Martha from her house, burned the front porch, and accused her of stealing cattle. Martha knew the accusation was a lie. She also knew nobody in town would dare stand against Caleb Voss. By noon, they had taken her into Blackstone Canyon. The deepest part of the canyon was nearly 3 miles from the nearest road. Caleb's foreman, Hank Mercer, tied Martha's hands and pushed her toward a dry creek bed. "You should have taken the money," he told her. Martha looked at him. "You should have learned the difference between a woman who is poor and a woman who is powerless." Hank laughed. "You've got no one." Martha stared directly into his eyes. "That's what you think." Hank struck her across the face. Then he and the others mounted their horses. Before leaving, Hank tossed a small canteen into the dirt. "Maybe you'll make it till tomorrow." The riders disappeared. Martha waited until the sound of their horses faded. Then she slowly crawled toward the canteen. It was empty. She turned it upside down and laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because she finally understood. Caleb Voss had made one terrible mistake. He thought Martha Bell had spent 68 years becoming weak. He had no idea what she had spent those years becoming. Martha had been born in 1850 in Missouri. Her father had been a scout. Her older brothers had fought in the frontier wars. And before Martha became a quiet rancher's widow, she had spent years riding beside men who were now nothing more than names on old graves. But there was something Caleb didn't know. Something almost nobody in Red Hollow knew. Martha had once saved the life of a young gunfighter named Elias Creed. And Elias had never forgotten. Neither had the 14 men who rode with him. Martha reached beneath the torn collar of her dress and pulled out a small brass whistle. It had been hidden there for 27 years. She looked toward the canyon walls. Then she blew 3 short notes. Nothing happened. For several minutes, there was only silence. Martha closed her eyes. Maybe they were too far away. Maybe they were dead. Maybe the secret she had protected for decades had finally disappeared with the men who knew it. Then she heard something. A horse. Far above the canyon. Then another. Martha opened her eyes. A dark figure appeared on the ridge. Then another. Then another. 15 riders slowly emerged against the setting sun. Every one of them carried a rifle. And at the center rode a tall, gray-bearded man with a black hat. Elias Creed had come back. And he had brought 14 men with him. Elias Creed was 71 years old. His beard was almost completely white, but his eyes were as sharp as they had been 30 years earlier. He dismounted and walked down the canyon. When he saw Martha sitting against the rock, his expression changed. "Who did this?" Martha looked at him. "Caleb Voss." Elias's jaw tightened. Behind him, 14 riders dismounted without saying a word. These were not ordinary cowboys. They were former scouts, trackers, ranch hands, soldiers, and gunfighters who had traveled the frontier with Elias for decades. Most people believed they had scattered long ago. They hadn't. They had simply learned how to disappear. Elias gave Martha water. Then he wrapped a coat around her shoulders. "You knew I'd come." Martha shook her head. "I hoped." Elias looked toward the canyon entrance. "Then your hope saved your life." Martha slowly stood. "I don't want Caleb dead." The men exchanged confused looks. Elias frowned. "After what he did? I want the truth." She pointed toward the distant mountains. "Caleb isn't after my ranch because of oil." Elias listened carefully. Martha told him what she had discovered 3 weeks earlier. While repairing an old barn, she had found a sealed metal box hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were land documents, letters, and an old military map. The map showed that her property wasn't ordinary land. Beneath the eastern ridge was an underground water system connected to a massive natural spring. Whoever controlled that spring could control water for nearly every ranch in Red Hollow. The oil story had been a lie. Caleb wanted the water. He wanted to force every rancher in the county to buy water from him. And Martha's land stood directly over the source. But there was more. One of the letters had been written 40 years earlier by Caleb's father. It revealed that he had illegally diverted water from neighboring ranches during a drought. Several families had lost everything. Martha had proof. Real proof. Elias stared at the documents. "Does Caleb know you found these?" "I think so." "Then why didn't he search your house?" Martha looked toward the burned ranch. "Because I moved the box yesterday." "Where?" Martha smiled faintly. "Somewhere Caleb will never find it." Elias almost smiled. "Still keeping secrets." "At my age, secrets are easier to carry than regrets." They rode through the night. Martha traveled in the center of the group while the 15 riders surrounded her. At sunrise, they reached an abandoned mining camp overlooking Red Hollow. From the ridge, Martha could see Caleb's men gathering near the town. There were more than 30. Elias counted them. "Looks like Voss expected trouble." Martha shook her head. "He expected frightened farmers." She pointed toward the valley. "He doesn't know the truth is coming with us." By noon, the riders entered town. Every conversation stopped. People stepped out of stores. Children ran into the street. The 15 riders moved slowly down Main Street. And at the center sat Martha Bell. Alive. Caleb Voss came out of the sheriff's office. His face went pale. He had watched Martha disappear into Blackstone Canyon. He had been told she would never return. But now she was sitting on a horse beside Elias Creed. Caleb's hand moved toward his pistol. Elias immediately raised his rifle. "Don't." The entire street went silent. Martha dismounted. She walked toward Caleb with her cane. "You left me in the canyon." Caleb swallowed. "You weren't supposed to survive." Martha stopped 3 steps away. "That's the difference between you and me, Caleb." She lifted the metal box. "You thought survival was about strength." Then she looked around at the townspeople. "It's about having something worth surviving for." Caleb's face changed when he saw the box. He knew exactly what was inside. "Where did you get that?" Caleb tried to deny everything. He claimed the documents were forged. He called Martha a liar. He ordered the sheriff to arrest Elias and his men. But the sheriff didn't move. Neither did anyone else. Because the townspeople had finally realized something. If Martha's documents were real, Caleb Voss had been stealing their water for years. Martha opened the box. Inside were original land records bearing the county seal. There were letters signed by Caleb's father. There were maps showing the underground spring. And there was a ledger recording every payment made to officials who had helped conceal the truth. The sheriff read the first few pages. His face became pale. Then he looked at Caleb. "You've been stealing water from half this county." Caleb reached for his gun. Elias moved faster. His rifle struck Caleb's wrist, sending the pistol into the dirt. Several of Caleb's men raised their weapons. 15 rifles immediately pointed back at them. Nobody fired. For nearly a minute, the entire town stood frozen. Then one of Caleb's men lowered his rifle. "I ain't dying for him." Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, half of Caleb's men had surrendered. Caleb stared at them in disbelief. "You cowards." Martha stepped closer. "No, Caleb." She looked him directly in the eyes. "They finally understood something you never did." "What?" "Fear only works while people believe you're stronger than they are." The sheriff placed Caleb under arrest. But Martha wasn't finished. She took the map and walked toward the center of town. "There is a spring beneath my land," she said. "And it belongs to nobody." The ranchers gathered around her. "We can build a shared water system. Every family gets a fair portion." One old rancher stepped forward. "Why would you do that after what they did to you?" Martha looked toward the burned remains of her home. "Because I know what happens when one man controls everything." The ranchers agreed. Within weeks, construction began. The spring was opened. Water flowed through wooden channels into the surrounding fields. Caleb Voss went to prison. His ranch was divided among the families whose land he had exploited. And Martha rebuilt her home. But the story of the 15 riders traveled far beyond Red Hollow. People said Elias Creed and his men disappeared again after the trial. Some claimed they went north. Others said they settled in Mexico. Martha never told anyone. Years later, a young traveler asked her why 15 armed men had crossed hundreds of miles just to rescue one old woman. Martha smiled. "Because I didn't ask them to rescue me." The traveler frowned. "Then why did they come?" Martha looked toward Blackstone Canyon. "I asked them to make sure the truth survived." The traveler didn't understand. Martha simply turned toward the sunset. Behind her stood the rebuilt ranch. Green fields stretched across land that had once been dry and worthless. Water ran through the channels. Children played near the barn. And on the porch hung 15 old rifles. One for every man who had ridden into the canyon. Martha kept the brass whistle around her neck until the day she died. People remembered her as the old woman who survived the desert. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was that Caleb Voss thought he had buried a helpless 68-year-old widow in a canyon. Instead, he had awakened a promise that had been waiting 27 years. And when Martha Bell returned 2 days later with 15 armed riders behind her, Red Hollow finally learned the truth. Never mistake an old woman for a powerless woman. Sometimes age doesn't take away a person's strength. Sometimes it simply teaches them exactly when to use it.